Hey y'all, I just finished this miniature corn maze. Let me show you how I built it. The first thing I built was the base. I used some 4x4 Douglas fir that I got at my local big box store, and I cut it down. I will show you the design here in just a second if you didn't see it in the thumbnail, but basically it's just going to be two X's on the top and bottom with a piece in the middle, and then pieces cut at 45s to brace it, making triangles on the support pieces. I used this miter saw I got here from a garage sale for $60, and I still have the blade on it I got at the garage sale, and it's working great. This is the layout. I was originally going to make two pieces like this and then bridge them together with a piece on the top and the bottom, but then I just decided to make this center support the center of the table and just have two other legs branch off on each side. So that's what I'm doing here. I ended up making the legs a little bit wider, so I cut the original legs in half and took a little section out of it to make the pieces that branch off, and then I made two more original legs. So here I am cutting the little section out of the middle. You can see how I'm making it in the background there. And one last piece, cutting the long piece. And now it's time for sanding. No one cares about sanding, so I'm just going to tell you that I used 120 grit sandpaper and a random orbit sander and sanded everything down so that it was nice for painting. I meant to do this next step before sanding, but I forgot, so I'm just going to go back and do it now. I set up a stop block so that I could cut off the tips of the legs so that there wasn't any sharp points. I simply set up a stop block a ½ inch over and cut off all the tips at the same length. I have never used a biscuit joiner before, but I picked this up at a garage sale and thought this would be a good project to use it on so that I could get everything lined up properly. The first thing I did was mark out the center of everything so that everything would be lined up properly, and then I started cutting everything with the biscuit joiner. The combination of the lumber not being perfectly smooth and the table having a little bit of flex in it meant that the biscuit holes didn't line up perfectly at first, so I had to go back and redo them, but after the second time, they all lined up properly. Next I glued and clamped everything together, but I had a really hard time getting this to clamp because I couldn't get the clamps on both sides because of the angled edges, so I had to take it all apart and unglue it and try again. This is another failed attempt. I tried to put some blocks in to put my clamps against, but that ended up not working at all, so I had to undo all that and try the third method, which was using pocket holes on the bottom and then clamping on the top, and that eventually worked. So just used some pocket holes, drilled in some wood screws, and then clamped it the other way, and that worked. And I did the same thing on the other one, so I have two, one for the top, one for the bottom. I let these pieces dry overnight and then unclamped them the next day. It turned out good. I'm going to attempt to dry fit it together with the clamps before I actually glue it together. The biscuits ran into each other in the hole, so I had to sand down one edge of the biscuits. I'm still loving my flip-top bench where all my tools are tucked underneath, and the video I made on it, the short, has about 30 million views. The YouTube video only has like 20,000. So you go check that out if you want to see how I built it. But one of the most common comments I get is that they couldn't have this bench because they have too much stuff on their bench all the time. And so do I, but I just shove it out of the way and then flip the thing up anyways. I used a ton of glue on this project. Most of my experience is in home building and construction type stuff, and I'm mostly used to using nails and screws and not glue and clamps. So Whenever I do use glue and clamps, I think I put on way too much glue because I'm just nervous that it's not going to hold together, but it did hold together, so I did put on enough glue. After clamping everything down, I measured both edges, like from side to side, and clamped where necessary to make sure that both of the sides were evenly spaced. Because of the clamping on the other side, we have it pulled up a little bit on this side. So I'm going to take this needle and fill it with glue and squeeze it into that crack. And that crack there. After letting the glue dry for a while, I got it unclamped, and then I measured it to see if it stayed in square. Not exactly. This is 5/16 difference between these two and an eighth between these two. But it's fine. Next it was time to glue in the angled pieces. I once again used a lot of glue, and this time I nailed them down using some 2-inch long 18 gauge brad nails. I then repeated this with all the extra pieces. I made sure to wipe up the excess glue as I went. I had this 2-inch ball for a trailer in my hoard of stuff, so that's what I'm going to use to pivot my tabletop on. But before I can do that, I need to find the center of the table legs. I'm going to take the nut that comes from the ball hitch and insert it into the center of the table legs. But first I need to figure out what size of a hole to drill to fit it in there. I ended up needing a 1.5-inch Forstner bit. I then drilled a smaller 1-inch hole for the threaded part of the ball. I then simply hammered it into place. And now I can adjust the height if I want to. Now that I have my ball installed, it's time to pull out my drill press so that I can make a hole for the ball to sit in. I pulled out my calipers and found the appropriate size Forstner bit to drill the hole. I then drilled the hole about 1 inch into my piece of wood so that it would fit onto the ball. The maze is going to be 40 inches by 40 inches. I cut that base out of a piece of plywood that was 3/8 of an inch thick using my circular saw. I then drilled a hole in the center of that piece of plywood and stuck my drill bit through the center of that hole and the center of the block of wood that I am going to use to sit on top of the ball. I then attached it using a couple screws. Alright, time to build a frame around our piece of plywood. I'm going to be using 2x6s, planed down to 1 1/8 inch. I find when I use like construction grade lumber to build things like this, it's best to like try to make it some sort of weird dimension so that it doesn't feel like a regular 2x4. So a 1 1/8 inch makes it kind of feel more natural or just custom. To give myself something to attach the frame to, I cut some 2x4s down and ripped them in half. And then I screwed them to the piece of plywood and then screwed the frame to those 2x4s that were screwed to the piece of plywood. I then added some screws to the corner to make the corners a little bit tighter. I then did some sanding and trimming with a saw to get all of the edges and corners flush. And after digging through the dry part of my wood putty to get to the good stuff, I patched in all the holes and cracks and spaces in my stand and in the top of my table. Now it's time for the final sanding. After one final sanding, it was time to add the stain. I used a walnut stain and applied it using a foam brush and a rag. I finished off the base and the tabletop frame using 2 coats of clear matte polyacrylic, and I sanded with 320 grit sandpaper in between each coat. Because most corn mazes are made on brown dirt, I decided to use this brown hardboard backer as the background for my corn maze. This will be what I glue the AstroTurf you can see in the background to. After that was done, it was time for the hardest part of the build for me, and that was to draw out the design. It took me several attempts over several days, but eventually I got it just freehanding it using a white colored pencil. Now that I had my design drawn out, it was time to cut out and glue down the AstroTurf. It took several days to cut everything out using an X-Acto knife, a box cutter, and a pair of scissors, but eventually I got everything cut out to the rough dimensions. This is completely new territory for me. I have never built anything out of AstroTurf before, so this was a new process learning how to cut it all out. After I got everything cut out and laid out in its rough position, I then went back and trimmed everything up and got it glued down with hot glue. During this process, I had to make sure there was enough space between each gap that a 1/2-inch ball bearing could get through it so that this corn maze would be playable. I also had to glue everything down in the right order and overlap it properly so there weren't any weird gaps. This process was super tedious and in total probably took me around 6 hours to complete. I wanted to make a handle using a tree branch, and luckily I was able to find one in this empty field by my house. After marking the attachment points, I drilled some holes through the back and attached it using wood screws. Now it was finally time to add the completed corn maze to the completed stand. It was a pretty tight fit, so I ended up pushing it in with a screwdriver. Eee! I'm so excited how it turned out! Time for the maiden voyage. If you like this project, then you might like the other build videos on my channel, so go check them out. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on what I build next. Thanks for watching. Bye!